You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku, as you already know. Today we're going to be continuing our discussions that help us, put us in the right mindset to creating this new African-centered curriculum. And the topic today is demythologization and demystification of African initiation rites, a positive and meaningful educational aspect heading for extinction. Before we get into the show, I just want to say thanks to all who tuned in to my rant this morning. That video has been doing really, really well, and I appreciate everyone who checked it out. If you are familiar with the 5150 show, or Corey Holcomb, the comedian, or Zoe Williams, the voice of reason, but particularly if you're familiar with the 5150 show, the rant will make sense to you. If you're not familiar, then it won't make sense to you, right? But you can check it out all the same. There is some lessons in there that are true regardless of whether you know who the participants are or the show that they're from. All right, so once again, thanks for listening, and if you haven't listened, please go ahead and listen as soon as you can. I also want to remind you guys, as I usually do, that this show is a part of a podcast network called KWAZ Radio Podcast Network, and there are other shows besides mine that you can listen to. Take a listen.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-Black perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
All right, so I realized eventually, I see in the chat room, Pro-Black Perspective is on it. Just told me you can't hear me. My bad on that. Yeah, so we're talking about this paper tonight, the demythologization and demystification of African initiation rites, a positive and meaningful educational aspect heading for extinction. And a part of the reason why I mute for the promos, and then sometimes I forget to unmute. So my apologies for that. So the reason that this is heading for extinction largely is because we've allowed folks to attach negativity to certain aspects of these rites of passages that we've historically had. The truth of the matter is, though, that a lot of these rites of passages have been corrupted or had been corrupted after contact with Europeans and European ideologies, philosophy, etc. And with that, I'm including Islam, right? And so we've kind of backed away from some of these things, right? And a lot of times, some of the things that we would consider bad or horrible or what have you, were things practiced by a very limited number of people. But as I hope this paper will get across to you guys, the idea that you should have, and it's necessary to have, these initiation rites, right? And it's necessary to be tied to, your educational, curriculum, all right? So let's start the reading. The purpose of this article is to delineate those things that have led to the distortion of the rites of passage performed by Africans. The rites constitute the very soul of the educational process for African youth. For Africans, the mythification and mythologization of initiation rites through cultural domination by missionaries, colonialists, and neo-colonialists have reduced this educational tool to merely the trimming of genitals and other strange savage practices. Distortions of these culturally based practices have almost led to their extinction. Many Africans have been alienated from their cultures and coerced to adopt the Western type of education. Most Africans have been deprived in their youth of the understanding and teaching of the fundamentals of their society, thus exposing them to cultural genocide and lower levels of self-esteem. Demystification means to remove the mystery. In this case, demythification means to remove the mystery from the rites of passage. Demythologization means to divest of mythological forms in order to uncover underlying meaning of the concept of rites of passage. As Africans and African Americans begin to introduce and reintroduce these cultural concepts, the goal is to avoid mistakes made in the past. That is, Western cultural perspectives in education, government, economics, religion, and so on have overshadowed or displaced African traditions. Failure to incorporate cultural relativity within these systems has led to a decline in these practices for both Africans and African Americans. This has had a devastating effect on families, communities, and societies. A cultural crisis exists for Africans and African Americans. And that's the thing with the curriculum project that we're working on, right? The curriculum project that we're working on, by the way, if you guys are in the Discord, and let me post a link for Discord. If you're in the Discord, you should be able to see the activity that we're working on now, where we're critiquing an established African-centered curriculum, a couple years old, but it's out there. And if you want to, when you join, just say, hey, I'm here for the writing team. How can I help? Hop on, and you could start to do the critique as well. The deadline for the critique was created about 2 weeks ago, and so tomorrow is the deadline for submitting it. But of course, you could send it in after the deadline. Hopefully on Saturday, maybe a few people who were part of submitting their critiques will want to jump on the Discord, and let's have an open discussion, a live stream discussion of what we found with the curriculum. So I'm pasting the link in the Discord. Sorry, in the chat room. Pasting the Discord link in the chat room. By all means, click and join today. So one of the things we will probably discuss is kind of the failure in this particular curriculum as a rites of passage, so to speak. In some ways, it's still kind of Western in its scope, right? I don't want to give away all the details right now, but that's one of the things that you'll notice. And so, that comes about when you have, as they say here, the failure to incorporate cultural relativity within these systems. You see what I'm saying? You gotta get people and thoughts and stuff involved that are truly immersed in our original African tradition, right? To continue, rites of passage offer a continuity that link youth with adults and link both with the larger community. This manifest function instilled responsibilities, a value system, and internalization of the culture in youth. This enabled youth to make better judgments about life and to avoid many of the problems facing them today. Adolescent pregnancy, alcohol and drug abuse, homicide, crime, identity crisis, homelessness, and single parenting are but a few examples of such problems. And I thought this was a good inclusion in this article, and I think it's a good inclusion in the curriculum discussion. When you having these discussions about health or sexual health or what have you, like, there has to be, and I always found this to be problematic even when I was a youth. When I was a youth in the 90s, right, in high school, there was a lot of pregnancies and stuff. And I think the thing that no one really understands is how these adolescent pregnancies, the single parenting, how that affects the three markets I talked about at the start of the year: health, wealth in particular, and relationships. And I think that the discussion in curriculum needs to talk about these things. It needs to talk about alcohol and drug abuse. It needs to talk about the facts about homicides in our community. I don't care that a black person is likely to be killed as much as a white person is likely to be killed by a white person. I don't care about that. We are in a situation where we have to be on point. We can't allow for friendly fire in this war that we're fighting, right? We need to talk about identity crises. We need to talk about homelessness, etc. And I think that type of stuff needs to be addressed well in a curriculum, especially as you get, as you start working up towards older and older kids. But it shouldn't be ignored even with younger kids as well. Mystification and mythologization and rites of passage. That's the section that we're in now. Mysteries and myths have led to mystification and mythologization of the rites of passage. In summary, they are: African rituals were primitive and therefore should be abandoned. Only the Christian way was proper for one to become civilized. The Christian way was God-given and had no Western cultural influence. Circumcision for females was barbarous and a means of mutilation for control of women. Christianization of sexual relations that arose out of the belief, widespread among the early missionaries, that sex in African societies was loose, especially being polygamous people. And the final one, 6, is that the final one? Africa as a dark continent could not be civilized. Therefore, anything out of Africa must be barbarous or savage. All right? So that's what needs to be, changed, right? When we talk about our attitudes towards rites of passage. To continue, as secretive societal practices, these rites of passage were known to Africans only and not to outsiders, and that's an important point. And that's a point that, has been said and repeated over and over to this day. Like, stop including other folks in what you do. A couple years ago, there was an article of this white boy who went through some Maasai rites of passage, and it was like headline news. And I'm looking at it like, the fuck was he doing there? Right? So Africans on the continent need to tighten up too, right? These rites of passage were known to Africans only and not to outsiders. Why are you letting outsiders do this stuff? And we always see these images of white folks wearing African garb and all this type of stuff and dancing in African dance. I mean, come on, man. Anyway, to continue. This may have been the main contribution to the mystery. These African myths and mysteries, along with many others, were accompanied by a great deal of systemic coercion to Western culture from the Europeans. Africans were forced to abandon their ways and adapt to the Western culture. Europeanization of Africans has become a powerful tool in alienating both Africans and African Americans. Second, internalized racist attitudes prevent the recognition of practices of domination that could have been avoided. For example, control of the females through infibulation. You guys know what infibulation is, right? That's where that involves mutilation and sewing up the vagina and all that, type of stuff. Failure to recognize the philosophical and cultural differences of groups has not disclosed the fact that the more influence and contact of African cultures to Caucasian cultures, the more prevalent the practice of mutilation. And that's what I was saying, that may have been lost in the silent part when my microphone was muted. But that's what I was saying, that a lot of these things, that these negative attributes people have put on African rites of passage, actually most of that stuff comes from after there was contact with Europeans, right? Again, when Africans become in contact with Europeans, you have the savagery of Europeans starts to shed itself on us. This is why we should avoid contact with them as much as we can. Hicks in 1996 noted the greater emphasis on female virginity practices of infibulation in northeastern African countries. She emphasized that infibulation is the most extreme form of female circumcision, and it plays an important role in the Islamic societies of Northern Africa. You see what I was telling? Again, this might have been lost when my mic was muted, but this is the point. A lot of that stuff is, a lot of that stuff really occurred and worsened or what have you after contact with Europeans and this Islam stuff. Right? To continue. Hold on, let me get a drink of water here. Absaria in 1993 indicates that until now, the social significance and function of this practice has been poorly understood. He maintains that this has been no less true of Western commentators who have condemned the practice than of the relevant governments that have attempted to curb it. Hicks, again in 1996, further suggested that infibulation was a cultural trait is deeply embedded in a historical traditional milieu, and therefore it is not easy to eliminate. This is akin to the larger issue of gender inequity and the double standard. I see that KW Dawn asks a interesting question here. Peace to KW Dawn, by the way. KW Dawn 7. Is female circumcision indigenous to Africa, or did it come from outside? Well, that's a good question. Again, learning it from the Western side, personally, right? My learning says that it was something that was done in Africa, right? But from what I've been learning in recent times is that perhaps this practice came through Islam, where it was, you know, a greater, you know, it was a more extreme version of like Sharia law or something like that. So it's a good question. If you learn it from the Western side, we think that Africans were doing it, but when you take a look, a peek into from the continent side, it sounds like it's more so an Islamic thing to me, and it's an import. All right, KW Dawn 7 says thanks for the wrench. Yeah, he's a moderator. I should have told him that in advance, I guess. Yeah. So if KW Dawn, if there's a link that needs to be posted, KW Dawn has the ability to post links now. So yeah, to continue. Yeah, by the way, I'll send that question out to the pro-black perspective. In your studies, is female circumcision of the continent, or was it an import, particularly an import of Islam? All right. Such distortions can be easily eliminated by understanding the philosophical aspects of rites of passage as described by Kenyatta in 1965, Turner in 1981, Mbidi 1988, and Genep in 1975. By reading the works of these people, one will clearly understand the meaningful aspects of rites of passage by the majority of Africans as a positive concept. One will also learn that the less influenced areas of Caucasian cultures to Africans, the more equality there is between males and females with regard to exposure to the curricula of rites of passage. African women are given higher regard than men. African women are given higher regard than men. The Washington Post article, Women in the Third World, in 1993, supports this point and discusses how Asian women are treated regarding gender inequality. Many female infants were killed or sacrificed in an attempt to get boys. The practice is uncharacteristic of any African group with lower levels of Caucasian cultural contact. Interestingly, in the past 10 years, African Americans have begun to revive the practice of rites of passage. This practice is an enduring and very useful concept in socializing youth and establishing a cultural identity. These leading pioneers are highly involved in the reintroduction of the concept of rites of passage in the Western Hemisphere. The rites of passage as a concept or model that gives youth, both male and female, fundamental and essential life skills, right? And that's, you know, that's the thing about a curriculum, right? A curriculum is a roadmap. So you decide where you want to be. And a curriculum is supposed to be a stepwise roadmap of sorts to get you there. So if it's power, then everything in that curriculum is supposed to be teaching, right? Or immersing the learner in some type of power dynamic. These are in direct conflict with European American culture. Therefore, caution should be taken in reintroducing these rites of passage to avoid collusion caused by the African intellectual's dilemma. Collusion caused by the African intellectual's dilemma. In the chat room, I see the pro-black perspective has commented on the question. He says, I heard it was African female circumcision. So he heard female circumcision was African. That's what I heard. But again, I have to admit that I have learned from the Western side of things. Maybe from the continent side, there might be various answers, one answer, or what have you. I'm not sure, right? So we're going to talk about this collusion caused by the African intellectual's dilemma. Such a dilemma is well described by Obechina in 1992, who discussed a many-sided dilemma that may be faced by Africans as well as African Americans in reintroducing the rites of passage. Several questions are posed. So let's check out these questions. How does the African intellectual react to ideas and theories evolved in the age of European imperialism? These ideas were primarily used to shore up the power structure, to legitimize imperialism, and to sustain the ascendancy of European hegemony. Read that again. How does the African intellectual react to ideas and theories evolved in the age of European imperialism? These ideas were primarily used to shore up the power structure, to legitimize imperialism, and to sustain the ascendancy of European hegemony. Question number 2. How does the African intellectual react to a world formation that either excluded Africans or relegated them to marginal statuses? Right? How does the African intellectual react to a world formation that either excluded Africans or relegated them to marginal statuses? Third question. How does the African intellectual... Y'all hold on one second. People will ring your bell at the worst time. It's not like I'm even able to cupcake or something like that. Where was I? In the chat room, I see that the pro-black perspective says, oh, the Arab one is to desensitize women from sex, but the African one had symbolism in regards to adulthood and becoming the full gender, similar to how man had circumcision. Similar to how man had circumcision. Okay, that, I have actually heard that before too. that the female one was was, you know, like the equivalent of like the male circumcision to say that you're an adult now. Yeah, so okay. So the third question was, how does the African intellectual negotiate a situation that at its worst could mean total annihilation, and at its best a permanent entanglement of ambivalence, ambiguities, and a profound sense of insecurity? Yeah, so you know, I mean, again, you tend to be a servant of the teacher. Remember, the teacher at one time was called the master, right? And you tend to be kind of the servant of the teacher and the teachings. And so these African intellectuals, it will come down to where did you get your knowledge from? Where did you get your ideologies from? And that will answer probably most of the questions here, right? And that's the problem. You know, we need our intellectuals to have an education that comes from us, right? Whereby they understand themselves better, understand their community and their people better. You know, and in that way you won't have, you know, the complexity that arises when you try to answer these questions. To continue, these questions reveal the complexity of the reintroduction of African rites of passage. However, they do not mean that it is impossible to revive them. Because of the lack of a viable way to teach African diaspora youth in both the West and in Africa, rites of passage curricula and their implementation are important. Rites of passage curricula are being revived with various methodological changes. For example, women should have a choice about circumcision, and the medical hazards of other practices such as scarification of faces must be considered. It is important to note that abandoning the whole concept of rites of passage without re-examination of the positive, esteem-enhancing aspects may contribute to deepening the cultural vacuum realized by the youth and adults of African diaspora today. Another significant point to consider is that the rites of passage curricula may not be fit for implementation in the traditional school system. More appropriate settings may include homes and communities. Teaching the rites of passage in the home and community gives other meanings and values that can neither be legislated in school policies nor regarded as options. And I agree with that. That's how they get you too, by the way, right? The legislations is how they get you, so that even, you know, well-intentioned African-centered schools that one might physically send their children to are still under, you know, these laws, right? These rites and rules that makes it where they cannot do or cannot go, you know, as deep as they probably want to go, right? It also, these rites rules, these laws also make it where they gotta teach a certain amount of European content in a very European way, right? And so that's something you got to be mindful of too when you're talking about African-centered learning or African-centered curriculum. You have to create something that works well in the home and the community. So if legislation, you know, so that you could avoid, you know, this legislative factor, right? You know, give me a second. Let me take a quick station ID break here.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
And we're back. People, I gotta say something. You guys heard the bell ring a second ago. I've been having these visits about some neighbors of mine and their kids from ACS, you know, that Children's Protective Services thing. And like, to tell you the truth, I don't even know the guy had children. I don't hear no kids around. I don't see no kids. You know, and here you got these government agencies sending out people to interview strangers about another stranger's children. You gotta be careful out here when it comes to your children, and the system. The system is eager to gobble them up and separate them from you, man. It's just wild, you know? It's just wild. So I had to take that quick break just now to deal with that. Let me continue. So one significant point to consider is that the rites of passage curricula may not be fit for the implementation in the traditional school system. More appropriate settings may include homes and communities. Teaching the rites of passage in the home and community gives other meanings and values that can neither be legislated in school policies nor regarded as options. One of the major limitations is that the principles guiding the curricula are against the philosophical assumptions that shape the curricula in Western cultures. Rites of passage curricula are more proactive than Western curricula and are oriented toward developing youth who are independent thinkers and creators. Thus, confidence and high self-esteem become the central focus. With this training, African youth can better survive through major odds. You know, the thing with these rites of passages, they tend to be rigorous, right? And you get into them in the formative years at a young age. And so once you could go through those things and conquer those things, you know, you are better able to conquer things in the future as adults. You know, I took that approach with my kids. Like, you know, you take them from young, you teach them how to ride a bike. You know, as soon as they reach the age where you could teach them to drive, you teach them to drive. Right? Because once they see themselves conquering these things and the things that they've conquered becoming, you know, second nature, becoming, you know, not a big deal anymore, right? Then when they go into their adulthood, that's how they will go, you know, that's how they'll go at challenges in their future. It's no big deal. I've conquered things already. I have a history of conquering things. And we got to set our kids up to have a history of conquering things so that when they become adults, challenges mean almost nothing to them. We've reached this part of the paper called Educational Implications of the Rites of Passage. Research has shown that when a child reaches 6 years of age, almost 2/3 of ultimate cognitive growth has occurred. Thus, it is not surprising that Africans initiated their youth from ages ranging from 6 to 16 years. Africans understand the teachable or critical life stages of their children by providing learning fundamentals of life through initiation rites, laying the foundation at the age when learning is critical. Ages 6 or 7, the concrete operation stage, is when qualitative forms of thinking or intellectual development begin. Western education regards a child 6 or 7 years old as a baby, and therefore does not expose his youth to the meaningful experience of life skills at the proper time. How many of you agree with that? Thumbs up if you agree, thumbs down if you don't agree. I'm curious to know, especially those of you with kids, but not just limited to you. How many of you believe that the Western education regards a child 6 or 7 to be like a baby, right? And doesn't expose these youth, 6 or 7 years old, to any meaningful experience of life skills, right? How many of you agree or disagree? There is no wonder that Western education now is searching for innovative ideas to improve the educational system, which is failing the youth. Although African traditional education systems may seem aged, they may play a big role in reviving education for Western youth, especially for African Americans. This also indicates that one does not have to reinvent the wheel, but look for those misunderstood and misused cultural, not religious, aspects that may improve the educational process, especially during the formative years. It is also timely that cultural diversity has become a norm both nationally and worldwide. Therefore, serious research needs to be conducted to ascertain the most factual ways in which youth can be given meaningful learning foundation that would foster self-confidence. Such an approach will not only be positive, but also empower youth as they prepare for a capable adult role in life. In the chat room, we have some activity. The pro-black perspective gave me a thumbs up on my question, right? The question was, do you think the West treats 6 and 7 year olds as babies and not really giving them true life experiences? He gave me a thumbs up. He says, my son 5, but I'm using 2nd grade work for him because the other grades are too babyish. And that's the same thing that Onita just said just now. That's what I did with my children. I gave them, first to begin with, when my kids were like little, you know how people talk to children in that baby talk? You want Bubba? You want? Nah. I'm not on that foolishness, right? You want a bottle? Say bottle, right? Say I want a bottle, or say, etc. Of course, not before a certain age, right? But I never spoke to them in baby speak. When I was giving them books and whatever, I intentionally gave them books a few years, a year or two older than what they were. So only time I say is doing the same thing that I was doing with my sons at the same age. Yeah, give him 2nd grade work. It may take him a minute, but he'll adjust and he'll do it. Initiation rituals play an important role in any organization or society, although rituals may differ from group to group as cultures differ. The symbolism of the initiation from childhood to adulthood is universal from group to group across the African continent. Unfortunately, there have been incredible distortions in the understanding of African cultures. Some distortions have been intentional and others occurred through misinformation, lack of information, or lack of cultural relativity. The intentional distortions which have occurred as a result of cultural domination have resulted in cultural genocide. Another reason for intentional distortion is either consciously or unconsciously through the African and African American intellectuals who may have been taught by the duality that they face from, who may have been caught by the duality that they face from exposure to both Western and African cultures. these intellectuals failed to find the best way to integrate into the educational system. Intellectuals have been responsible for translating the cross-cultural aspects in shaping the education in the African diaspora. Obichina in 1992 pointed out that the African tradition is the encyclopedia of African values, attitudes, history, and ethical models. The intellectual cannot be ignored of it and remain seriously African. Such ignorance places intellectuals outside the center of the order of knowledge, the delicate sensitivity that sharpens the individual's responses to totality of a human system. The tradition, the African tradition, is the encyclopedia of African values, attitudes, history, ethical models. The intellectual cannot be ignorant of it and remain seriously African. I like how that's stated right there. Right? Such ignorance places intellectuals outside the center of the order of knowledge, the delicate sensitivity that sharpens the individual's responses to totality of a human system. In the chat room, KW Don 7 says that the West uses Yorugu as the benchmark. Yorugu children develop slower than African children. The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child by Amos Wilson explains this. Yeah, one of the things that Amos Wilson talked about that I liked was a serious question, and this question is raised in one of the critiques of the African-centered curriculum that we're discussing, that we're critiquing on the Discord. And that is, how do you unlock the genius within the African child? Well, I talked about what I do with my kids. The pro-Black perspective is talking about what he's currently doing now. And I think, frankly, more of that type of stuff is what really unlocks a genius. But I'll add something here that I'm realizing as I have sons in high school now. Something I'm realizing is you can have the best curriculum, right? You could have the best in-home curriculum, right? You could be pushing knowledge to your kids. The truth of the matter, though, is if they're spending more time outside of the home and around kids who are not having that same level of consciousness, right, pushed towards them from their parents and or guardians, right, your children will still do some dumb shit. That's not indicative of the knowledge that you've been given them. And so I thought about that, and it made me think of the old saying about it takes a village. But the thing about the village, why it takes a village is because, well, if the village is in lockstep, more or less, right, then all of the influences that the child might receive are in lockstep with the village. And when I say children doing dumb stuff, I'm not talking about the dumb stuff that youth, does. Right, I'm talking about in terms of their outlooks on life and their mindset. If the village teaches, if it takes a village to raise children, which I agree with, the thing about that is the village usually tends to have, itself in order, right, to a certain extent or whatever. And if everyone's moving at the same pace, the same step, right, then your children should be fine. But we're in a situation out here where we don't really have a village. And so the influences that our children receive outside of the home, right? That's where the problem comes in. So that's something we got to really start considering. And this is why outreach is so important, right? This is where you have to get more and more people thinking along these lines, right? And or you have to start moving into communities together, right? Now, that's another one of the things the Rastafarians used to do, used to call it a camp back home. Those guys, you know, they moved into these communes, and all the children were taught all the same at the same time. And they had these all-age schools that you'll see people like Booker T. Washington talking about, things like what my grandparents went to, right? There's something to that. There's something to be in this what's the word? To be in the orbit of consciousness, right? Where everything and everyone around you is pretty much on the same page. There's something to that. And I'm realizing that now, right? That's the biggest problem, I think, with the public school system. The biggest problem with the public school system in the sense of you can be doing all the right things at home, right? But they go around their peers who are not receiving the same type of instructions or what have you. And that, you know, that leads them astray, so to speak. Although initiation as an educational tool is still in use in many African cultures, it is facing extinction, especially in countries that are dominated by Christianity and Western education. Generally, there is a failure to integrate the curricula in Christianity because doing so would defy the principles guiding the Christian mission. The Christian aims have been to replace the African cultural experience by assimilating the African in the Western culture. Luckily, there are remnants of groups that still practice their original ethnic rituals, as well as the adapted Western rituals, especially in education. In the Western countries, for example, the United States is facing cultural and educational crisis because of suppression of diverse cultures in the effort to maintain one universal culture that is a monocultural or Anglo conformity. This results in a dominant subordinate relationship in society, because education based on this paradigm becomes oppressive, pathological. Pathology becomes a norm in the way members of society view themselves. A serious study of African cultures may once again become an essential educational tool, especially for African Americans and Africans. Thus, the demystification and demythologization of the African initiation as rites of passage may be a solution for improving the failing educational system for people of color. I don't know why you would say people of color. You know, one of the things that and this is for you guys who have been working on this curriculum critique, and this is also for you guys who haven't, but one of the things we really have to address, as I mentioned a few episodes ago, is we don't have textbooks. But what we do have, we have African-centered thinkers who have written books. And what we must do, I believe, is come up with a ever-evolving, but definitely we must come up with one to begin with, a list of books that are appropriate, you know, to certain ages or grade levels, right? We gotta really be able to come up with a good set of books, right? Ones that were created by African people that the youth can read, or we as the teachers read to the students. I saw only from the pro-black perspective post something a little while ago, and I forgot which book it was, but he was talking about he was reading a book to his kids, and it reminded me of when I used to read certain things to my kids, African myths and folk tales, right? There's this children's classic book. Actually, there's a few of them on African myths and folk tales. And I used to read those things to them. So stories like the, what's it again? The man and the four hyenas, you know, stuff like that were stories that they heard young. You know, creation stories. You know, the origin of Lake Tanganyika, right? The beginning of death. And those stories, by the way, is something that you'll notice if you ever really start reading African folklore and, like, you know, what the Europeans call fairy tales and mythology and stuff like that. They don't pull no punches. They don't pull punches. They're stories of gruesome death. They're stories of tricksters lying on people and all kind of stuff like that. Like, it's real. It's a real experience of life. And these stories are taught to young children. And so we need to use what we have available to us. We don't have textbooks per se, but we do have books that we can pull from, that we can pull text from, right? And use them at, you know, not at age appropriate levels, but at a little bit higher than age appropriate levels, right? That's what we got to do. You know, and so for those folks who are working on that curriculum and stuff, I want you guys to think about what books you've read, right? That would be good to start getting these youth into. You know, I gave my son this Booker T book on character building. I think it's something that he really needs to read and internalize and have a discussion with me about in terms of character. Because he's getting to be that age now where, you know, just now he's going to be 6 foot something tall, right? And he's going to be viewed as a man out here in the streets, right? And so you need to start working on your character. You need to be upright. You need to you know, etc. You need to know how to serve your community, etc. And so this is something that I'd like you guys to think about as well. Anyone who's listening, what are some of the books that are out there? African created books that are out there, right? In fact, there's Onitase's books can be used. He does a worship every week. And he's reading from, you know, one of his books, like things like that. Put those things on the list. Let's sort it out. In the chat room, the Pro-Black Perspective says, that reminds me to break out my folklores book. Carter G. Woodson wrote one too. See, I didn't know Carter G. Woodson wrote a folklore book. And now that's good to know. And I have a few of Carter G. Woodson's books. I didn't know that, right? But yeah, if you want to get through these kids, man, there are stories that are African. You know, the lion, the leopard, and the dog, you know, that are real serious stories. And it starts to open up certain discussions. As a matter of fact, let me grab this book here. And let me go through the contents. Hold on. There's a story in this book called The Ingrate. What do you think that's going to teach children? Right? There's a jealousy of the blind man, the race for a wife, the dare and the snail, Ohia and the sorrows, why some women never eat mutton, the beginning of death, like I talked about earlier, creation, you know. And so these works good introductions to students. And so, again, help us compile an appropriate book list. In fact, that's a document I'll make. I'll post it in the Google Drive and link it to the Discord, where folks can just go in and add the books they think are appropriate for each grade level or whatever, right? So that'll be the next step of the curriculum stuff. We gotta start getting a book list, and then we gotta start breaking down. This is why I hope to see Carl Hezekiah more in the Discord. Carl Hezekiah and I used to do the book club back in the day, and do these book club reviews, which were awesome. So he's a guy who's well read as well, and I think he's an education major, so that's a resource I like to tap into. But to continue, the principles learned during the African Rites of Passage are those that have been adapted to the cardinal virtues of Ma'at: truth, justice, righteousness, harmony, and balance. And that's what you will read in a lot of these African folk tales and myths, by the way. That's what the children get early, right? These virtues, having been derived from African values, seem to have been lost, stolen, or strayed to appear more European in origin. These African values, perceived and taught as non-African, may be the reason that Africans and African Americans may reject them. It is important to understand the symbolism of the initiation rites to comprehend their meaning. This part, unfortunately, has been misconstrued because in the past, whether it was anthropologists or missionaries who have tried to interview Africans to learn about the rituals, the answer the interviewees gave were those they felt the interviewers wanted to hear, whether true or not. Misinterpretation through language also played a major part in distorting the truth, because neither the interviewer nor the interviewee would talk openly about what was considered taboo regarding initiation. A little activity in the chat room. I see Active Mindset is here. I haven't seen Active Mindset in a while. Active Mindset says, yeah, the book club reviews were very good. I agree, and I'm biased, I know. I think they were very good. The problem was we didn't have a lot of interaction. If we were doing the book club reviews in a live stream where we had participants in the chat room, that would have made it better, and we might have still been doing it if that was the case. But as it stood, we didn't really have much discourse about the book reviews. Not many comments were dropped, etc. And so that, and a couple other things happened where we didn't do the book club anymore. And Carl Hezekiah used to tell me that book clubs, because he tried it in person, and they were very hard to get people to participate. And he would go all out sometimes. He would have food and stuff there for people to come, and come to find out folks didn't read the book. I guess they came and ate, but they didn't come to talk about the book, which is kind of weird. Anyway, this brings us to the section of the paper called the initiation process. Initiation marks when one learns the law of the land, that is, the rules of the society and the responsibility of obeying the rules of self-respect and respect for others. Most of these initiations occur between the ages of 6 and 16, depending on the particular ethnic group. Most groups go through initiation rites at earlier ages. It is important to note that one should not address young initiates as children, whether male or female, because they have earned the respect of adulthood. Children do not behave as children after the rites. This may be viewed as depriving the children of their childhood, by the dependency-oriented cultures of the West. However, it seems reasonable to start initiation with the youth as early as Africans do for better adult development. You've had more time after being initiated. You'll be a better adult, right? You've had more practice at it. For many African groups, the initiation rites involve trimming of genitals or clitoridectomy for females, and for the male, circumcision is performed by cutting the foreskin. Examples of such groups that practice both of the above are the Kamba, Chikuyu, Luya, and mostly Bantu groups. All right? So I guess right here, this kind of tells you the people that were really doing this. All right? Trimming of genitals. Other groups, such as the Maasai, the Ndembu, and so on, may perform scarification on the face or other parts of the body in addition to circumcision. Other groups, such as the Luo and the Ndembu, take out the 6 front teeth of the lower jaw, but do not circumcise. So this takes us to this section called, about the trimming of genitals. Trimming of genitals symbolizes and dramatizes separation from childhood. This practice is parallel to the cutting of the umbilical cord when the child is born. Sexual organ attaches the child to the state of ignorance, the state of inactivity, and the state of potential importance. But once the link is severed, the young person is freed from the state of ignorance and inactivity. So as long as a person is not initiated, he cannot get married, and he is not supposed to reproduce or bear children. So I gel with that mindset, right? If you haven't passed through rite of passage, right, you have no business being a person who's creating children out here, who's marrying people, which means that you're supposed to be the protector and the provider, but you haven't gone through the rigors, right? I'm not so much down with the genital mutilation, right? But that part I could gel with. In the chat room, Chief Mindset says, I do not think there's ever a lot of views on these subject matter due to the nature of our agenda. I agree with that too. It's funny. I think I talked about it at the beginning of the show. I don't know if it came through because my mic was muted for a minute there. But I did this rant this morning on the 5150 show. You guys are familiar with Corey Holcomb, the comedian, his podcast, his YouTube show called the 5150 Show. Him and this other guy who was a regular on the show named Zoe Williams, they got into it recently. And I was talking about the lessons you can learn from the whole uproar that occurred. And it's a 20-minute video that has had more views than, say, the last 15 videos I've done combined. I'm not exaggerating. Right? 20-minute video talking about this thing that happened has more views, more likes than, say, the last 15 videos I've done combined. So it shows you the importance, it shows you what's important in our society. But the most important part of that is that subscriptions haven't really gone up. Likes on other content on the channel hasn't gone up. So people just came for the entertainment, they comment a bunch, and then they bounced. So there is something to be said about there is something to be said about the kind of content that we're talking, right? And what people are really, what's really our people's agenda, right? The agenda that those of you who are listening here today have is different from most of our people's agenda. You guys are here because you want to talk building, nation building. You want to talk empowerment, and a lot of our folks really just like current events and stuff like that. The pro-black perspective says, damn, the rant attracts more. Goes on to say, yeah, current events is the move. Yeah, I mean, Oni and I kind of knew that, right? We kind of know that. The stuff that we're talking about, the stuff that Oni's talking about, the warships that are heavy but so uplifting. I guess maybe you have to have a certain energy, a certain mindset to really take that in. But if you guys aren't listening to the warship on Sundays, I tend to miss it because I sleep late on Sundays. But if you could tune into the warship live, especially, or just listen to the playbacks, like it's full of gems, right? And those aren't getting the numbers of a rant about a beef or disrespect between two guys. It's wild, right? Anyway, to continue. MBT further states that the shedding of the blood onto the ground binds the person mystically to the living dead who symbolically exist in the ground. Although these practices may not be applicable, such curricula should not be abandoned, but be applied and modified in accordance to today's norms. In conclusion, the intention of this article was to delineate the myths and mysteries that led to the distortion of the rites of passage as initiation rites by Africans. Caution should be taken in translation, transformation, and application. This can be misleading if careful research is not conducted and appropriate approaches are not taken. The philosophical assumption should be understood, and a clear theoretical approach should be developed before attempting to apply any model related to the concept. It is also important to point out that it is not just anyone who is chosen to conduct the rituals and teachings. It is a very well acknowledged person who has earned the skills and the wisdom. A great deal of psychology is involved, and therefore not just anyone can administer the experience without proper training or knowledge. However, the concept of rites of passage should not be dismissed because of the lack of proper information. It should be noted that mutilation can be easily perpetuated as a dominant aspect of the rites of passage for all groups of African people. Although mutilation has been practiced by a small number of groups of African people, it should not be used to eradicate the positive aspects of the initiation rites of passage. The negative aspects can easily overshadow the positive due to the stereotypical perceptions of the African continent, which is often confused as a country. This caution is necessary, especially when reading books such as Possessing the Secrets of Joy by Walker in 1992. When reading this book, one may perceive the brutal practice of mutilation as practiced by all Africans. And then this leads us to the references. Right? And I've gone through some of these references, and I plan to actually present some of them in future readings. Yeah, so I hope you guys enjoyed this paper. I hope it opened up something in your minds in terms of thinking about, ways to go about initiation or rites of passage in the present. And I hope, you guys will share your thoughts with me on the Discord. Again, I posted the link in the chat room. Make sure, click it, join the Discord. I also put out a call to action the other day for Black women, because I find it funny that you know, no Black women have really, or very little I should say, Black women have really answered the call to help in this endeavor. And women, Black women, are super important in designing this rites of passage or this curriculum for our children. So I'd like you guys to check out that video as well. I'm going to link it to this video at the end. In the chat room, I see Achieve Mindset is saying, I see the Pro-Black Perspective is saying 15 minutes of fame. I guess, did I achieve 15 minutes of fame, or did they achieve, or did Corey Holcomb and them have 15 minutes of fame? But whatever it was, me talking about it definitely got more views on that one video than anything else I've done in the last 15. And the sad part is that it doesn't translate into, you know, more subscriptions or what have you, which is what Achieve Mindset says right here, that it's a sugar rush. Yeah, people like, you know, and I, as a matter of fact, in the video I mentioned how, you know, our people like beef and drama, and here comes some, I suspect him to be a FBA or ADOS type person, comes and talking about, you're not even American. You don't like beef. You're not even American. You're talking about Black people. Dude, I'm Black. You know, I can critique anything in the Black, in any society, much less Black society. All right. Achieve Mindset said people want entertainment and to move on. Yeah, that's what the video, the rant, kind of showed me that. And in fact, you know, I developed the rants early in the pandemic as a way to get back into doing the podcast, but also I figured that there's certain things that happen in our lives that we witness that I could speak to and take 15 minutes to talk about, right? So I guess it works, right? Achieve Mindset says I need to listen to the warships. Yeah, I mean, everyone who's here listening to me, first of all, you should be checking out all the other shows on KWAZ radio, but yeah, definitely listen to the warships, right? The warships, to me, are a better sugar rush, so to speak, than listening to what the, you know, what's going on with these celebrities and whatnot. All right. So anyway, guys, seems like there's no more questions or comments, but I do want to say thank you guys for coming out and listening to this paper. And again, you guys know how to contact me through the Discord, social media, email. It's right in the top left of your screen. You know, if you want to talk about rites of passage, which again, I think is going to be the next part of the project after we finish the critiques. Let's talk about how we could implement traditional or ancient rites of passages. We ain't cutting nobody or scarring nobody, but how can we introduce those things into the curriculum? All right. Tomorrow's the deadline for the initial call for the critiques of the African-centered curriculum on the Discord. Again, send them to me. You could DM me or you could @ me on the channel. I'll pull them down and I'll separate the answers per questions. And on Saturday, I'll do a show. I was gonna do a documentary or something. I'll push that back to the next Saturday. But we could talk about the responses. The Pro-Black Perspective says some people may get cut. That's true too. Thanks to the podcast. Yeah. You know, so definitely, let's talk about, let's see if we can come together on the Discord, do a live stream and discuss our critiques, right? And then we'll move on to step 2. And until then, You guys be safe. It's been a pleasure. This has been the Bitter Medicine Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.